Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in this wonderful world of ours. We have a very special edition of a program with Trina Paulus, who is the author of Hope for the Flowers. We've changed our name and we're calling it, well, I'll tell you what, Trina, why don't you announce what the new name of our series is going to be? Because I think it's significant, especially on a day like today.
Well, Scott, what's really fascinating is that it seems that every week it's more exciting and different than I would have ever anticipated me being involved with, like the Korean effort that's behind me and the nuclear stuff that I was dealing with before. And now we have war on all fronts. And with this Israeli Hamas sort of thing that's exploded all over the place. So this is really big. So it seems to me a lot of things go back that I still say that Hope for the Flowers seems to fit. I can't understand that God gave me a book that seems to be written for our times that was published 50 years ago. It seems such a blessing. It's just a gift. Our lives are gifts, folks. I think that's the most important thing to remember, no matter how dark things seem. If we're alive, it's a gift. And we can always find something to be grateful for in the darkest times. And I hope that you, like myself, can look back at some of the darker times later in life and say that, boy, that turned out to be a blessing for me in some way or another. And so that's certainly my case, and I appreciate it. So this is a big week, Scott.
Yeah.
And the name, you asked me what the name was.
Yes.
The slogan I'm kind of attached to, which is pretty much what it's been about all the time, but I'm more and more thinking that it fits Hope for the Flowers and the need that we have for peace in the world, which is radical sharing, freely chosen. Both parts are important unless we can get to a radical sharing, and that's not so easy. That's the climax of love one another as I have loved you, love your neighbor as yourself, that basic law of love. And that means getting off your pillar. And everyone has pillars all the time that we have to get off of. Maybe it's a pillar of doing good. It's maybe my pillar of trying to be available and say yes to people. Whatever your pillar is, you have to get off of it and take time to listen to the needs around you and to look at both sides of the picture. And that is so critical in this warlike atmosphere we're in right now. And if you read it all, the Art of War, that famous little book about if you can win without fighting, it's the best thing. And the most important thing is to understand the real needs of the person you can decide is your enemy and take it into serious consideration, like the needs of the Russians, the needs of the Palestinians, the needs of the Israelis, the needs of the Ukrainians, the needs of NATO, and not just make an immediate reaction to things like we tend to do and choosing sides. There are so many sides to these issues. And somehow I've been involved in 3 of the biggest ones right now, the Russian and Ukrainian thing, the North and South Korea need for peace that is far away and close, and the problem of their now commitment with Japan and the United States, obviously to keep China intact, and to control China. I mean, why do we do these things? Why do we seek enemies and create situations of conflict? I don't know the answer, but radical sharing unto death if necessary, like Jesus showed us. That's our job. And freely chosen is the other way, because that's the way to the spiritual decision that has to be there for everybody to make that decision. Each person makes a decision. And think of how beautiful it could be if we get off our pillar, choose the cocoon, and come out of these gorgeous butterflies. And enough of us make enough decisions like that. And that kaleidoscope of butterflies carry love from one flower to the other all the days of our life and be fed by their nectar what a glorious thing it could be instead of this making war. And in terms of climate change, which is part of what I want to share a little bit about this week too, is if war is the worst thing for the climate there can be, the US military, war, and armaments are about the worst thing for the planet survival that there can be, both in its use of gasoline and fossil fuels and displacement of people and starvation and not being able to raise crops. All of that. And I just want to say that the world, not the World Health Organizations or the UN Food Summit, not that one, because they don't let the indigenous people in it, but 70% of the world's food is raised on 10% of the world's land by peasant farmers. And their big day is the 16th of October. And there's an amazing thing if you get on Regeneration International. And it starts in the South Pacific and it runs around the world and it gets to the United States about 10 o'clock at night. It's a marvelous thing to try to do and see how the indigenous peoples of the world raise their food and are listened to. And we need to listen to them because that's the way that carbon is sequestered by organic systems like that. They don't use a lot of fossil fuels. They don't use a lot of pesticides and insecticides, which all come from fossil fuels. Did you know that? Most people don't even know that. So be careful of greenwashing. Be careful of these things. So these are all related to peace and war. I remember at the UN for one of the things I was at that a girl from Iran was there and they were at war with Iraq at that time. And she says, well, when there's war going on, you can't focus on the environment. And she's right. War is the worst thing for the environment that there is. So if we want to stop global warming, we have to stop war. So what you have here, Scott, you brought up this, I'll put my glasses on for this one. This is what?
That's the
oh, good. This is a fabulous program. Regeneration International. You can get to it also by going to Organic Consumers Association because you'll learn an awful lot on that one. I belonged to that one for 40 years. So it's a really special time with them. Okay, thank you, Scott, for that. So the food production and war is very close. And so these are part of it. So there's the prayer. This also is October 4th is the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. And so he has this beautiful prayer for peace. I thought we could say together. And also Pope Francis, whose name comes from this St. Francis, has put out a new thing. I don't know if you remember or have ever read one of the great letters of the world that was written to everybody who lives on this earth, called in English, Our Common Home. And in Latin, it's Laudato Si. And this one is called Laudato Deum. And this is a new letter that's come out now on the 6th, asking for us to pay further attention to the Earth's needs. And so it fits with these other things. Oh, there's a picture of it. And it's in all kinds of languages, I think, Scott. I think it's in about 7 languages. You can get it if you look it up. It's saying you can just look up Pope Francis' letter. It's Laudato Deum. That's God. Praise to God. It's from the prayer of St. Francis. And so he put it out on that feast day. So that's a good thing to look at. And if you've never studied Laudato Si, the first one, it brought people of all religions together to struggle for the environment. It has become a classic now it's not just for Catholics. It's for everybody. And so is this one. And so, Scott, you have that prayer of St. Francis up. Let's say a prayer because we're in such a warlike situation. And so all of you who want to pray with it, it's on the screen for you. And so I'll lead it, but you can pray in your own heart or say it out loud. The prayer of St. Francis. Lord, make instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, Let me so love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in the pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Okay, that's it. So thanks, God. And so I've made some other things that Scott seems to have those too that I found in these last 2 days because of the whole intensity of the whole situation with Israel and Hamas. Some of the people, the groups that I belong to in some way or another. And so, Scott, you have some of those things, don't you? Yes. Now, who is this? This is Joyful Spirituality. Is this the?
That's the All Saints Church.
That's in Pasadena, California. It's an Anglican church that's made a special mission to be related to the Middle East and speak out about these things. So they have a beautiful statement that's up if you want to look them up. All Saints Church, Anglican Church in Pasadena, California. Okay, I found that very beautiful statement. And this one, Scott, let's see, which one is this?
That's the Campaign for Peace.
Oh my, this is by a fellow named Gerson. And it's one of the classic campaigns for peace and against nuclear war, which all of these things leading to, we're so close to midnight with it. It's terribly scary. Okay, thank you for that. That's a great one. And then this one is.
I think that's all that we have. We also had this one with this is a new one.
Yes, and this is the one I joined this group. I'm a Catholic, and this is the Jewish Voice for Peace that welcomes all of us allies, and I would be an ally because it's a totally Jewish-led thing. And I've joined it a year ago. I've not just joined it with this latest situation because for over a year, especially with this most recent Israeli government, which is considered the most far-right and anti-Palestinian one that has ever been in this 75 years of Israel. And it's just horrible what's been happening, even before what's going on right now. What's going on right now is terrible. But if we don't dare look at the thing that was led up to this, we won't see how different sides, there's more than one side of a picture. There's probably more than two sides of pictures. And so there's a lot going on there. I don't know what we are with our time, Scott.
And what we'll do is we'll put links to those sites that you have that we've just shown in the description in the comments below, for both for Facebook and for your YouTube community.
Thank you, Scott. I'm so glad you can do this. Maybe there is time for me to tell my little story where I was kind of in this sort of thing. I was never really in danger, but we didn't know that at any time because it could have been. I was working in Egypt helping develop a cooperative for young girls who were so poor they couldn't even go to school, even though schooling was free. This was in what they call Upper Egypt, about halfway down from the Mediterranean to the Sudan. And it was Akhmim, a very ancient city of 50,000 people. It was no little village. And it was a very ancient because the bridge had just been built that took it to the site of the Nile that had the railroad and the train. None of those things were there. And there was some old Mercedes that acted as the taxis where you had to go over there. So what happened is that because we had shortwave radios at our international team, we knew already on Monday morning that the war was already lost because American planes piloted by Israelis, had bombed the whole Egyptian airport on the ground. And so the Egyptians didn't know that. And we were right across from a mosque, and we kept hearing about the war going on. So finally, 3 days later, my French leader of this group that I work with, called the Grail, said, Trina, you got to get out of here, because I was blonde and I didn't speak much Arabic, so there's no way I could have passed. The Orthodox priest came and said, we want you to stay here. We don't want you to leave. But she decided I better leave and get to Cairo so I could get out of there. So they rushed me over to the train, 9 o'clock train, to take me to Cairo. And I went there, and I had no work anymore there. I didn't have anything special to do. So I then went with the first boat that came from Greece that would take people away. I went with the American Embassy people, and we ended up in Athens. And I ended up flying to Paris, to our Grail Center there, where I had the privilege of working for 2 years. So it's one of those things in my life that turned out very good for me in the long run, but it sure didn't look good in the beginning. And so that was my experience of evacuation in the middle of that June 1967 Six-Day War. So I've paid attention to all these things, as you can imagine, right along. My son was born during the 1973 war here in the United States, but he was born here. And so I have a great deal in common with all of this. And so I speak some Arabic because of this experience and all this. And so I'm very, very always concerned about it. So here I am, this sort of Ohio girl who's gotten into all of this. And then the whole Ukraine and Russian thing, I've been very aware of that. I don't know if people realize that after the 2014 military coup, where the elected president, democratic elected president, was thrown out, and our current president of the Ukraine was put in by others, and with a very big Nazi element part of it, and then the Russia took back because the Russian-speaking people in the Donbass and that part next to Russia voted to be with Russia because of the language and the church and everything, took it back. But that wasn't the beginning of this. It was a failed revolution 10 years before that the United States people had wanted to do. This is all to weaken Russia. So we are there with our intentions, and we're involved. The United States is involved with all of these things, even though these are not our immediate problems on our own borders. And we don't seem to understand the vital interests of the other people that we make such judgments about in any of these cases. So as an American, I'm so aware of all of that, and are aware of our parts in a Korean conflict too, that North and South Korea and the needs of all of these peoples. And then we get in there too, and we've made now a pact with South Korea and Japan and ourselves. It's all related to containing China. So what are we doing around the world? I mean, I feel that we are starting to overreach ourselves with all of our military bases. And it's just very hard to know what to say about all of this, because it's dangerous to say anything, because it can be taken out of context, and yet some of us have to speak out. So
well,
it's
50 years ago, you came up with a message for the world, and that was the message that you had in Hope for the Flowers. And 50 years later, you have maybe the same message, but stated a little bit differently, and that is radical sharing, freely given.
And just to remind people, if you manage to climb over others in order to get to a top, and you really get to the top, you might be there for a little bit, but you'll be thrown off and you die without ever becoming yourself. And that is the message of Hope for the Flowers, and how beautiful it can be if you become your full butterfly self. And that there's a whole kaleidoscope. By the way, the plural of butterfly is kaleidoscope or or flutter. I like kaleidoscope. It's so beautiful, the idea of a millions of us flying colors from flower to flower. So there's a little peace song that I can sing by heart, one version of it. Is it time for that, Scott, you think? Just a little
Yes.
for that sort
Well,
of thing?
why not? So we'll end up with this, and thank you very much for watching this week, and see you next time. So it's all yours, Trina.
This is a little church song, and there's a lot of verses that you could sing, but this is the first one. Peace is flowing like a river, flowing out of you and me, flowing out into the desert, setting all the captives free. And then you can go, and love is flowing like a river, hope is flowing like a river, and then alleluia. And so with all these hard things we're talking about and thinking about, let each of us start to be, peace is flowing like a river, and the source is letting all the captives free in a desert. Amen, sisters and brothers.